Welcome to Reform Thinking, and welcome to this deep dive. I'm really glad you could join us today. We're going to be looking into, well, a pretty remarkable few months in David Brainerd's life.
Yeah, it's quite a period.
To kick things off, just try and picture this scene he describes in his diary. He talks about being in such intense prayer that he was, and this is his phrase, quite wet with perspiration, though in the shade and the cool wind.
That really grabs you, doesn't it?
It does. It instantly gives you a feel for the raw emotion and the spiritual focus that really marked this time for him.
Absolutely. That level of physical exertion and prayer, it says a lot.
So our goal with this deep dive is to, carefully look at some key excerpts from the life and diary of David Brainerd, the one edited by Jonathan Edwards.
Right. Edward saw something truly special in Brainerd's experiences.
Exactly. And the idea here is for you, the listener, to quickly get a handle on Brainerd's spiritual life during this time, how he was getting ready for ministry, and what really shaped him in those critical months just before he got his license to preach.
Think of it as a way to get quickly acquainted with the core of his thinking and, well, his inner life during this formative stage.
Consider it your shortcut, if you like,
Yeah.
to being well-informed about this, well, really quite remarkable figure.
And the period we're zeroing in on is right after he left Yale College. So we're talking April through July of 1742.
Right, a time when he was laser-focused on preparing himself for gospel work.
And what makes these specific diary entries so compelling is just how honest they are. It's almost like a minute-by-minute feed of his internal spiritual battles and, those moments of breakthrough.
Gives you a real window, doesn't it?
It really does. A window into how he understood grace, sin, God's sovereignty, these big Reformed concepts, but played out in the day-to-day reality of this young guy feeling called to preach.
Okay, so let's dive in. Let's start looking at Brainerd's spiritual walk right as he began the third book of his diary. This is April 1742. He was staying with Reverend Mr. Mills in Ripton, studying divinity.
Yeah, and he wasn't just staying put. He was also visiting other ministers in the area, people like Mr. Cook in Stratford, Mr. Graham in Southbury, Mr. Bellamy in Bethlehem, soaking it all in, presumably.
Right, networking, learning. But what's interesting is what you mentioned earlier, his own assessment right at the start.
Exactly. As he starts this new record, he immediately flags up this feeling of spiritual decline. He talks about losing life and warmth in divine things.
So no pretending things are great.
Not at all. This immediate confession of, what he saw as spiritual coldness, it sets the stage for everything that follows. Like on April 1st, he writes about lacking free access to God in prayer.
It's quite specific.
It is. And he expresses this longing to be humbled deeply in the dust before God. It's an immediate sign of how he saw himself before his Creator.
And he goes even further, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. He flat out says, I deserve hell every day for not loving my Lord more. And any kind of spiritual renewal he experiences, he attributes only to God's special assistance.
So zero room for self-congratulations.
Yeah. None. He questions any kind of boasting, recognizing his total reliance on God for the being and every act of grace. He puts it so starkly. Oh, if ever I get to heaven, it will be because God will and nothing else, for I never did anything of myself but get away from God.
Wow, that's a blunt.
It is. And he even looks ahead to heaven, anticipating being astonished at the unsearchable riches of divine grace. This first entry really lays down his foundational belief. Salvation, any spiritual good, it all comes from God's free, unearned favor. It's pure grace.
That really sets a tone. Okay, so given this strong sense of dependence, of unworthiness even, how does that play out in his ambitions or his view of God's leading at this point? Does he focus inward or outward?
Well, that's a really good question. It makes you think about how our view of our own spiritual condition can actually steer our desires, right? On April 2nd, the very next day, he describes feeling much resigned, calm, and serene in secret prayer.
So a shift already.
A shift, yeah. He uses this beautiful image. What are all the storms of this lower world, if Jesus, by his Spirit, does but come walking on the seas? It captures the sense of inner peace he could find, regardless of outer turmoil.
Despite feeling unworthy just the day before.
Exactly. And what's really interesting here is how his desires seem to be fluctuating. He mentions he'd previously found much pleasure in the prospect of the heathen being brought home to Christ and wanted to be involved in that work.
Right, the missionary impulse.
Yeah. But now, he says, his soul more frequently desires to die, to be with Christ. He wants his soul wrapped up in divine love, for his desires for God to just grow and grow.
So a longing for heaven over service.
It seems like it at that moment, but then, later that same evening, he finds refreshment in prayer again, and his hopes turn back towards the advancement of Christ's kingdom in the world.
Ah, okay. So it's not either, it's a tension.
It's a tension, definitely. This early back and forth between wanting to depart and be with Christ and wanting to stay and serve, it's right there from the beginning.
And then physical health comes into play too, doesn't it?
It does. On April 3rd, he records feeling very much amiss, had a bad night, and this physical weakness leads him to think his soul would exceedingly rejoice if God just took him home right then.
Makes sense. Suffering can make you long for release.
For sure. But even then, his desires frame spiritually. He wants to be always humble and resigned to God, for his soul to be more fixed on himself, meaning God, so he could be more fitted both for doing and suffering.
So even in weakness, the focus is on being useful to God's purposes.
Precisely, whatever the personal cost. Then, April 4th, it's a Lord's Day, and he describes his heart as wandering and lifeless, which, as you said, seems to have been a fairly common feeling for him.
The ups and downs.
Right. But in the evening, God meets him. He gets faith in prayer. His soul melts in some measure. He tastes his divine sweetness.
So relief comes.
Relief comes. And then this longing bursts out to climb up near to him and love and long and plead and wrestle and stretch after him, and for deliverance from the body of sin and death.
That body of sin and death phrase, that's biblical, right? From Romans.
Yeah, Romans 7. Paul's description of the ongoing struggle against our own sinful nature. Brainerd clearly felt that burden very, very heavily.
You can tell. He mourns just the idea of losing sight of his beloved again. There's a real passion there.
A very passionate, almost, you could say, visceral pursuit of God.
Okay, so we've seen these initial days, this mix of highs and lows, sweetness and struggle. But then you mentioned he notes a sharp turn into darkness.
Yeah, it seems quite abrupt. After those moments of comfort on the evening of April 5th, he describes himself quite starkly as void of all relish of divine things.
All relish gone. Just like that.
Just like that. He feels much of the prevalence of corruption, sees in himself a disposition to all manner of sin, and this plunges him into a very great gloom, casts him into the depths of melancholy.
Melancholy, yeah. A common term back then for depression, often with spiritual overtones.
Right. And it fills him with horror, leaves him with no comfort in heaven or earth, a total contrast to the sweetness he'd felt just a day or so before.
That's a huge swing. What happens next? Does he stay there?
Well, on April 6th, he's in a similar state initially. Finds a bit of relief reading over his own diary entries, interestingly enough.
Seeing God's past faithfulness, maybe?
Perhaps, but then he feels suddenly struck with a damp from the sense I had of my own vileness back down again. He cried to God to cleanse me from my exceeding filthiness, to give me repentance and pardon.
So turning to God even in the depths.
Yes. And then something shifts again. He finds it sweet to pray, and incredibly, he feels he could think of undergoing the greatest sufferings in the cause of Christ with pleasure.
Wow. From horror to willingness to suffer, just like that.
It seems so. He even expresses willingness, if God directs it, to suffer banishment from my native land among the heathen, that I might do something for their salvation in distresses and deaths of any kind.
That's intense. To embrace suffering for the gospel, even while feeling vile.
It really speaks to his devotion, doesn't it? And that same day, God enables him to wrestle earnestly for others, for the kingdom of Christ in the world, and for dear Christian friends.
So this power of intercession kicks in again.
Yeah, this deep spiritual energy to pray for others. He feels weaned from the world and from my own reputation amongst men, willing to be despised and to be a gazing stock for the world to behold.
Letting go of worldly status.
Completely. He struggles to even describe how he felt. Not much joy, he says, but some sense of the majesty of God, which made me, as it were, tremble. Seeing himself as mean and vile actually made him more willing for God to do whatever he wanted with him.
That's fascinating. Feeling vile leading to greater surrender. His description of trembling, even in prayer, it really does paint a picture of his spiritual walk. Shows that deep awareness of his own condition.
It really does. It highlights this constant back and forth, intense spiritual connection on one hand and this profound sense of his own unworthiness on the other. It's always there.
So, the wrestling continues.
Oh, yeah. April 7th, the intensity fades a bit. He keeps praying, but feels dull in the evening. His spiritual state is almost never static.
Always fluctuating.
Seems like it. Then on April 8th, his hopes for the conversion of the Native Americans get raised again. He writes, "Oh, that God would bring in great numbers of them to Jesus Christ. I cannot but hope I shall see that glorious day."
Back to that outward focus.
Yes, but still paired with this inner self-assessment. Everything in this world, exceeding vile and little to me. I look so on myself. He gets some little dawn of comfort in prayer, especially at night. Some faith and power of intercession for his own growth and for other believers.
So praying for himself and others.
Right. And he concludes, it is good to wrestle for divine blessings. It shows that dual focus, again, personal holiness and concern for others, particularly the unreached.
And this sense of his own sinfulness, it doesn't let up, does it?
Not really. April 9th and 10th, his morning prayers lack sensible sweetness, though he keeps this delightful prospect of heaven in view. But that thought makes him feel more amazed than ever, for I see myself infinitely vile and unworthy.
The contrast is stark for him.
Very. He feels heartless and dull, longs for God's presence, but isn't feeling that divine and heavenly sweetness. He sees himself as the one most needing God's grace, and yet most likely to abuse it.
That's a harsh self-judgment.
It is. He spends much time in secret prayer on the 10th, gets some comfort, but still feels so low, so little sense of God's presence that he hardly knows what to call faith.
Questioning his own faith.
Yeah, and he feels the weight of the sins of my youth and the dreadful sin of my nature. I am all sin. I cannot think nor act, but every motion is sin.
That sounds like, well, like the doctrine of total depravity lived out.
I think that's exactly right. That reformed understanding that sin affects every part of us, even our best intentions. He feels it acutely.
Yet even in that state, there's a glimmer of hope about ministry.
There is, amazingly. On that same day, April 10th, despite feeling all sin, he says his hopes of being employed in the cause of God, which of late have been almost extinct, seem now a little revived.
How does he square that? Feeling totally sinful, yet hoping to serve?
He frames it through God's purpose in this struggle. He hopes his late distresses and awful apprehensions might prove but Christ's school to make me fit for greater service by teaching me the great lesson of humility.
Ah, okay. The trials aren't just random suffering, they're training.
Exactly. He connects his hardships directly to his preparation for ministry. God is using the darkness to teach him humility, which he needs for the ministry.
That phrase, Christ's school for humility, that really changes how you might look at difficulties in your own life, doesn't it? A different perspective.
It absolutely reframes things. It suggests purpose behind the pain. So, moving on, April 11th, he feels little spiritual vitality but has gratitude for God's grace and some sweetness thinking about heaven.
Still looking for it.
Always. Then, after public worship, God gives him special assistance in prayer. He wrestled with my dear Lord with much sweetness, and intercession was made a delightful employment to me. He finds joy thinking about the resurrection morning.
So moments of real delight break through.
They do, and April 12th seems like a significant moment of encouragement. The Lord was pleased to lift up the light of his countenance upon me in secret prayer, making the time very precious.
Light of his countenance, that sounds like feeling God's favor. His smile almost.
Precisely. He gets much encouragement respecting future serviceableness in the cause of God. He's especially assisted to intercede and plead for poor souls, for the growth of Christ's kingdom, and for grace for himself to fit him for special services.
So renewed sense of calling and purpose.
Yes, and accompanied by peace. He feels exceedingly calm and quite resigned to God respecting my future employment when and where he pleased. His faith lifts him above the world. He doesn't need human approval because Christ's favor was infinitely better.
Wow, that's a high point.
It really seems to be. He sees infinite wisdom in all the dispensations of God towards me, a moment of profound acceptance and trust.
But the self-awareness doesn't vanish.
No, never. April 13th, he still sees himself as very mean and vile, wondering why people show him respect. Yet he finds comfort in wrestling with God, knowing God always sends me needed supplies, and raises him up when he feels like one dead.
Constant dependence.
Always. Then April 14th and 15th, he's longing for communion with Christ and for the mortification of indwelling corruption, especially pride.
Mortification. That's about putting sin to death, right?
Oh, yeah.
The ongoing fight.
Exactly. That spiritual battle to kill sinful desires. He looks forward to the sweet day coming wherein the weary will be at rest. His desires are centered in God, wanting inward purity and holiness 10,000 times more than for anything here below.
A clear desire for sanctification, for becoming more like Christ.
Very clear. And from April 16th to 18th, he often finds sensible joy in prayer, sometimes longs much to be dissolved and to be with Christ. He wants to grow in grace every day, but worries about his barrenness, feeling like an unfruitful tree God might cut down.
That tension again between longing for heaven and wanting to be fruitful here.
Right. On Sunday the 18th, he prays in the woods, gets assistance of God's Spirit, pleads fervently for God's kingdom, and intercedes for friends. He feels infinitely indebted to God, sees his failings, feels he's done, as it were, nothing for God.
It's quite something how his intense desire for personal holiness and his passion for God's kingdom work are just so tightly woven together in these entries. And then April 19th, you mentioned a particularly intense practice.
Yes, this day really stands out. He specifically set it apart for fasting and prayer. It shows the depth of his devotion and his focus on preparing for ministry.
Why fasting and prayer specifically for that?
He wanted to seek divine aid and direction for the great work of preaching the gospel. He needed clarity and empowerment.
Makes sense. So what happened that day?
In the morning, he felt the power of intercession for precious, immortal souls, for the advancement of the kingdom of my dear Lord and Savior in the world. He experienced this most sweet resignation, even joy, at the thought of suffering hardships, distress, even death, to promote God's kingdom.
Joy and potential suffering.
Seems so. And he had special enlargement, that freedom and scope, again, in pleading for the enlightening and conversion of the poor heathen.
In the afternoon?
He says, God was with me of a truth. He was enabled so to agonize in prayer that I was quite wet with perspiration, though in the shade and the cool wind. There's that vivid image again.
Physical intensity.
Right. His soul was drawn out very much for the world, for multitudes of souls. He felt more enlargement, more capacity praying for sinners than for believers, though he felt he could cry out for both. He enjoyed great sweetness in communion with my dear Savior, felt completely weaned from this world, and totally resigned to God in everything.
That's an incredibly intense day. And interestingly, his birthday follows right after this. Does that context shed any light?
I think it highlights his consistent focus. His 24th birthday, April 20th, isn't about celebration in the usual sense. He reflects on God's mercy over the past year, but also on how poorly he feels he kept his vows to be wholly the Lord's.
Still critical of himself.
Yes, but with a desire to live more to his glory. He calls the birthday a sweet, a happy day, feeling his soul was never so drawn out in intercession for others. He had a most fervent wrestle with the Lord for my enemies.
Praying for enemies on his birthday.
Yeah, longing to live to God and to be altogether devoted to him. I wanted to wear out my life in his service and for his glory. The transition from the intense fasting day to this birthday reflection is seamless. It shows that for him, this spiritual pursuit wasn't just an event, it was his whole life.
A life lived in that intensity.
Exactly. And it continues. April 21st to 24th, he feels much calmness and resignation, still enabled to wrestle for numbers of souls, finding much fervency in the sweet duty of intercession. He even notes having more sweetness in intercession for others than in any other part of prayer.
His focus seems very outward-oriented in prayer.
Often, yes. Then April 25th, a Lord's Day, is another peak. About 2 hours in private prayer, enabled more than ordinarily to agonize for immortal souls. And again, body was quite wet with sweat.
Physical toll again.
Yes. And he prays for the meekness and calmness of the Lamb of God, finding it a sweet disposition heartily to forgive all injuries done us, to wish our greatest enemies as well as we do our own souls. He longs to be more and more conformed to thee.
Conformity to Christ, forgiveness, key themes.
Definitely. That night, he's exceedingly melted with divine love, gets a feeling sense of the blessedness of the upper world, power and intercession again for believers and unbelievers. He wished and longed for the coming of my dear Lord, wanting to join the angelic hosts in praises, wholly free from imperfection.
Such a strong heavenly focus.
Immense. He says, all I want is to be more holy, more like my dear Lord. Oh, for sanctification. My very soul pants for the complete restoration of the blessed image of my Savior. He even dashes off a poem renouncing the vain world, declaring, my God shall then have all my heart.
Poetry too, he's pouring it all out.
Seems like it. Then April 26th, he's still in a sweet frame, but then feels spiritual pride stirring, and God uses that as an humbling season for him.
The battle never stops, even after such highs.
Never. It reminds him of his need. He exceedingly longs for that blessed state of perfect deliverance from all sin. At night, he gives his soul up to God, casts himself on him to be ordered and disposed of according to his sovereign pleasure, finding great peace and consolation.
Trusting God's sovereign will, a core Reformed idea.
Absolutely. Then April 27th, early morning, God was pleased to pour such ineffable comfort into my soul, just overwhelming comfort. He cries out, "Oh, my sweet Savior, whom have I in heaven but thee, and there is none upon earth that I desire beside thee."
God is everything to him in that moment.
Everything. He says if he had 1,000 lives, he'd gladly lay them all down at once to have been with Christ. He calls it the most refined and the most spiritual season of communion with God I ever yet felt, and says he never felt so great a degree of resignation in my life.
The absolute peak, maybe.
It sounds like it. But then the afternoon comes. He feels much declined, mourning again over the body of death that is in me. He grieves he couldn't pray and prays with his heart still full of divine heavenly love.
The swing back down. It's relentless.
It is. April 28th, 2 hours in prayer, depending wholly on his dear Lord, feeling wholly weaned from all other dependences, longing for perfect conformity to him, expressing these thirsting desires and insatiable longings after perfect holiness.
That longing for holiness is constant.
Constant. He finds God was so precious to my soul that the world with all its enjoyments was infinitely vile. I had no more value for the favor of men than for pebbles. The land was my all, and that he overruled all greatly delighted me. His faith and dependence scarce ever rose so high.
Gone as his all.
Yes, sweetness in praying for friends, for the kingdom. But then evening comes, his heart melts, humbled by indwelling corruption, mourning like a dove. He feels all my unhappiness arose from my being a sinner. He could welcome other trials, but sin hung heavy upon me.
Sin is the ultimate burden.
For him, yes. He goes to bed with a heavy heart because I was a sinner. Even though he doesn't doubt God's love, he prays God would purge away my dross and take away my tin and make me 7 times refined.
Like refining metal in a fire.
Exactly. Then April 29th, 30th, he feels kept off at a distance from God, but still finds some enlargement in intercession. He's somewhat dejected, grieved that he cannot live constantly to God's glory. He feels he could bear spiritual darkness if only his heart was all the while burning within me with love to God.
Love is the key, even in darkness.
Seems so. Finally, May 1st, he cries out with fervency for ministerial qualifications for God to advance his kingdom, bring in the heathen. He feels he had much assistance in my studies, calls it a profitable week with many communications of the Blessed Spirit.
So even amidst all the highs and lows, that struggle with sin is just always there. It's like a constant background noise, sometimes louder, sometimes quieter. And this rhythm seems to carry on into May.
Yes, absolutely. That pattern really underscores the ongoing nature of, spiritual growth and struggle. May 2nd, God gives him a sight of myself as made me appear very vile in my own eyes.
Another dose of self-awareness.
A strong one. He feels corruption stirring in my heart, which he could by no means suppress. He feels more and more deserted, was exceeding weak, and almost sick with my inward trials. You get a sense of how draining this internal battle was for him, physically even.
Almost making him sick.
Yeah. Then May 3rd, he feels this sense of vile ingratitude, mourns his abuse of my dear Lord. So what does he do? He spends the day in fasting and prayer.
His go-to response to spiritual struggle.
It seems to be. And God meets him there, gives him much power of wrestling for his cause and kingdom, and it was a happy day to my soul. He feels more above the world than ever in my life.
So the discipline bears fruit.
It does. But the cycle continues. For the rest of that week, May 4th to 8th, Jonathan Edwards summarizes that Brainerd frequently complained of desertion, inward trials, and conflicts, attended with dejection of spirit.
The lows were frequent.
Yeah, they were. But Edwards also notes that Brainerd regularly recorded times of relief and sweetness and daily refreshing visits of the divine spirit, which granted special assistance and comfort and enabled much fervency and enlargement in religious duties.
So it wasn't all darkness. There was this constant ebb and flow.
Exactly. A continuous rhythm of struggle and refreshment. That seems to be the pattern.
It's really noticeable how relentless his focus on his own sin is, even when he's experiencing these clear moments of comfort from God. Now, how does all this internal struggle, especially this recurring feeling of being vile, connect back to his past? Specifically, that incident at Yale College.
That's a really important connection to make. It makes you wonder how much those external events, like being expelled from Yale, were actually shaping this intense internal life he's recording.
Did it fuel the sense of unworthiness, maybe?
It's possible, or perhaps it focused it. Look at May 9th. He writes, "I think I never felt so much of the cursed pride of my heart, as well as the stubbornness of my will, before." He calls himself a vile wretch, wanting only to submit to be nothing and to lie down in the dust.
Pride and stubbornness, the very things that arguably got him into trouble at Yale.
Could be. He felt such a sinner all day that I had scarce any comfort, longing again to be delivered from the body of this death. He's even afraid he'll lose the spiritual benefit of his trials. Nothing seemed to touch me but only this, that I was a sinner. This constant self-emptying, it's central.
And this continues as he travels.
Yes. May 10th to 13th, he rides to New Haven, finds some comfort praying with others there, hearing about God's goodness to them. But then riding to Wethersfield, he's very dull most of the day. Little spiritual feeling.
The ups and downs continue on the road.
Right. He's much perplexed with vile thoughts, sometimes afraid of everything. He craves solitude. I cannot live in the midst of a tumult. I long to enjoy God alone.
Seeking refuge in God alone.
Exactly. He gets this distressing view of the pride, enmity, and vileness of my heart. Sees so much of the wickedness of my heart that I long to get away from myself. He feels he never realized how much spiritual pride he had, feeling almost pressed to death with my own vileness.
Almost crushed by it.
Seems like it. But then he concludes with this gem. Oh, the closest walk with God is the sweetest heaven that can be enjoyed on earth. Even in the depths of self-awareness, the goal is nearness to God.
So we've seen this intense internal wrestling. Let's link it more directly now to the Yale situation. How is that specific past event, his expulsion, actually affecting him now, months later? Is it still a shadow?
Oh, definitely. The diary makes it clear it still had a huge impact. But interestingly, rather than, say, making him bitter or just breaking him, it seems to have pushed him closer to God, towards a deeper humility.
How so?
Well, on May 14th, there's a practical development. He waited on a council of ministers convened at Hartford. He actually presented his case, told them about the treatment I had met with from the rector and tutors of Yale College.
So he's seeking redress.
He is. And the council thought it advisable to intercede for me with the rector and trustees and to entreat them to restore me to my former privileges in college. After this meeting, he spends time in spiritual exercises with Christian friends.
So the practical consequences are still very real. He needs this external validation in a sense.
He does. But his internal response remains focused on God. From May 15th to 19th, writing to Hebron, he's somewhat dejected, sees himself as exceeding vile, sees much pride and stubbornness in my heart. He writes something remarkable here. Indeed, I never saw such a week as this before, for I have been almost ready to die with the view of the wickedness of my heart. I could not have thought I had such a body of death in me.
Ready to die just from seeing his own sinfulness.
That's how intense it felt. He prays for deliverance. Edwards notes he continues to complain of dullness and desertion, feels vile, longs to hide himself in some cave, though there were still intervals of comfort.
Hiding away.
Yeah. Then at Millington, he feels amazingly deserted, a sort of horror, reflecting, when God withdraws, what is there that can afford any comfort to the soul? It seems the Yale incident, by stripping away his institutional standing, perhaps forced him to rely even more heavily on an internal divine sense of worth rather than external approval.
Making him lean more on God when human structures failed him.
Possibly. But then, after these deep lows, from May 20th to 31st, there's a shift again. He expresses more calmness and comfort and considerable life, fervency and sweetness in religion.
A period of relative peace.
Yes. At New Haven on May 28th, he feels, scarce ever felt so calm in my life. I rejoiced in resignation and giving myself up to God to be wholly and entirely devoted to him forever. The next few days continue in a similar positive frame, maybe slightly less intense, but still moments of real peace and acceptance.
That constant swing from deep dejection right back up to profound calmness, it really does show the intensity of the spiritual battle he was fighting every day.
It absolutely does. It highlights the dynamic, constantly moving nature of his spiritual life. It wasn't static at all. June 1st, he feels much of the presence of God in family prayer, finds some comfort in secret. He's greatly refreshed from the Word of God, finds it exceeding sweet.
Drawing strength from Scripture.
Yes. And he prays for Christ's kingdom to come with power, for the healing waters of the sanctuary to spread and heal the nations. That outward vision is still there.
But then reality intrudes again.
Yeah, June 2nd to 5th, he's much diverted and hindered by physical weakness and necessary affairs. Practical life gets in the way. He speaks of having little power in religion, feeling God was showing him he was like a helpless infant cast out in the open field.
Utter helplessness.
That's the feeling. June 6th, Sunday, he feels much deserted, but then adds, but all this teaches me my nothingness and vileness more than ever.
Seeing even desertion as instructive.
Always learning from it. June 7th, still feeling powerless in secret prayer, he has this remarkable desire that all God's people might know how mean and little and vile I am, that they might see I am nothing, that so they might pray for me aright and not have the least dependence upon me.
Wow. He wants people to know his weakness so they won't depend on him, but on God.
Exactly. It's about pointing people away from himself towards God. Then, June 8th, he enjoys a sweet and precious season, saying he never before felt it so sweet to be nothing and less than nothing and to be accounted nothing.
Sweetness in nothingness. That's
Yeah.
countercultural, to say the least.
Deeply countercultural, but for Brainerd, it was a source of spiritual relief and joy. The next 3 days, June 9th to 11th, he's back to complaining of desertion and want of fervency, but Edwards observes his diary still shows his heart was engaged in religion as his great and, as it were, only business. Even when feelings were low, his fundamental orientation remained fixed on God.
It's truly remarkable how that desire to be nothing before God actually becomes a source of sweetness for him. It flips our usual values upside down. And now we seem to be entering a period that showcases some of his absolute most intense devotion.
Yes, these next entries really show an almost, you could say, radical level of spiritual focus, just completely absorbed in God. June 12th, he spends much time in prayer, enjoys much sweetness, feels insatiable longings after God much of the day.
Insatiable longings.
Yeah, he wonders how poor souls do to live that have no God. For him, the world, with all its enjoyments, quite vanished. He sees himself as very helpless, but quickly adds, "But I have a blessed God to go to."
Helplessness leading to dependence.
Always. He longs exceedingly to be dissolved and to be with Christ, to behold his glory. His weak, weary soul longs to arrive at my Father's house.
That longing for heaven is so strong.
Very strong. Then June 13th, Lord's Day. He feels something calm and resigned during public worship. At the Lord's Supper, he sees himself as very vile and worthless. He longs to always lie low in the dust. His soul steadily goes out to God, wanting to live upon him.
Humility, even the communion table.
Especially there, it seems. Then June 14th is another day of really deep spiritual experience. He feels the sweetness of communion with God, the constraining force of his love, noting how admirably it captivates the soul.
Captivated by God's love.
Yes. He sets the day apart again for secret fasting and prayer, seeking guidance about preaching the gospel. In the afternoon, he wrestles ardently in intercession for absent friends.
Praying intensely for others again.
Very intensely. And then, just at night, the Lord visited me marvelously in prayer. I think my soul never was in such an agony before. He felt no restraint, for the treasures of divine grace were open to me.
An agony of prayer. What was he praying for?
He wrestled for absent friends, for the ingathering of souls, for multitudes of poor souls, and for many that I thought were the children of God. He was in such an agony that I was all over wet with sweat. There's that physical manifestation again.
Sweating from prayer.
Yes, and yet afterwards he felt he had wasted away the day and had done nothing. That sense of inadequacy persists. But then he connects his experience to Christ. Oh, my dear Jesus did sweat blood for poor souls. I longed for more compassion towards them. He goes to bed with his heart set on God.
That comparison to Christ in Gethsemane, sweating blood, that's incredibly powerful. It shows how deeply he identified with Christ's suffering for souls. Really clarifies his whole spiritual drive.
It absolutely does. It shows a complete alignment of his heart with what he understood to be Christ's heart. Then June 15th, he records having the most ardent longings after God that ever I felt in my life.
Even more intense.
Seems so. In private prayer, he tells his dear Lord, he knew I longed for nothing but himself, nothing but holiness. He says he never seemed to be so unhinged from myself and to be so wholly devoted to God.
Unhinged from myself. That's a striking phrase.
I don't know, like being freed from self-preoccupation. His heart was swallowed up in God most of the day. In the evening, he gets this vision of the soul being enlarged to contain more holiness, so much so that it seemed ready to separate from my body.
Wow. Almost an out-of-body feeling connected to holiness?
That's how he describes it. He wrestles in an agony for divine blessings, prays for friends beyond what I ever had before. He feels more engaged to live to God forever, but interestingly, less pleased with my own frames, his own spiritual feelings. He felt they were far too little.
So even in peak experiences, he's not satisfied with the experience itself.
Right. The focus remains on God and holiness, not the feeling. Then June 18th, he's thinking about his great unfitness for the work of the ministry, his present deadness, his total inability. So what does he do? Sets apart another day for prayer.
Prayer as the answer to feelings of inadequacy.
Consistently. But he feels amazingly deserted most of the day. Yet God draws near once, opens his heart as he pleads for more compassion for immortal souls, enabling ardent cries. Still, he's distressed thinking he offers such dead, cold services to the living God.
Still feeling unworthy.
Yes, his soul seemed to breathe after holiness, a life of constant devotedness to God. He feels almost lost sometimes in the pursuit of this blessedness, ready to sink, because I continually fall short and miss of my desire. He prays for help just to hold out.
The struggle is real, even in the midst of intense seeking.
Very real. June 20th, Lord's Day, much time alone. Soul longs for holiness, reaches for God but doesn't feel satisfied, hungered and thirsted but was not refreshed. Yet his soul hung on God as my only portion. He desires to grow in grace more abundantly every day.
Holding on to God even when feeling empty.
Exactly. Then, June 22nd, after studies and prayer, he sweetly composed and resigned to God's will and able to leave everything with God, depend wholly on him. And then this statement. It's such a happiness to have God for my portion that I had rather be any other creature in this lower creation than not come to the enjoyment of God. I had rather be a beast than a man without God if I were to live here to eternity.
That's extreme. He'd rather be an animal than a human without God.
That's what he says. It shows just how absolutely central God was to his existence, to his very identity as a human being.
Underscores his priorities completely.
It does. And the rest of June, from the 23rd to the 29th, Edwards summarizes the diary as showing this ongoing cycle. Great longings after God and holiness, desires for others' conversion, fervent prayer, wrestling with God, moments of composure, comfort, sweetness.
The positive side.
Right. But also the other side, a recurring sense of the vile abomination of his heart, complaints of barrenness, the pressing body of death. He sees clearly that anything he enjoys better than hell was a free grace. He feels exceeding low, sometimes very disconsolate and dejected.
The full spectrum, right to the end of the month.
The full spectrum, never just one thing for long.
So even after all these incredibly deep experiences, these highs and lows, his spiritual path still throws significant trials at him right up to the brink of this really pivotal moment, getting licensed to preach.
Yeah, this final stretch is a powerful reminder that even, exceptionally devoted people face really intense internal battles. It just goes to show how much we constantly need God's support.
So what happens in these last weeks?
June 30th is a particularly rough day. He spends it alone in the woods and fasting and prayer, again, seeking God intensely. But he underwent the most dreadful conflicts in my soul that ever I felt in some respects.
Worse than before.
In some respects, he says. He sees himself as so vile that I was ready to say, I shall now perish by the hand of Saul. Like he's doomed to fail. He feels he has no power to stand for the cause of God, is almost afraid of the shaking of a leaf.
Crippling fear and self-doubt.
Completely. He spends almost the whole day in prayer, incessantly. He could not bear to think of Christians showing me any respect. He almost despaired of doing any service in the world. Even his usual comfort, thinking about the heathen, fails him. Could not feel any hope or comfort respecting the heathen. He spends the day in the bitterness of my soul. Only near nightfall does he feel a little better.
That sounds utterly draining, just days before his examination.
Exactly. But then, July 1st and 2nd, there's some recovery. He finds some sweetness in prayer, feels exceeding sweetly in secret prayer, desiring nothing so ardently as that God should do with me just as he pleased. He feels composed, his desires ascended to God while traveling.
Back to resignation.
Yes.
Yeah.
But July 3rd, his heart seemed again to sink, and guess what comes back to haunt him?
Let me guess. Yale.
Bingo. The disgrace I was laid under at college seemed to damp me, as it opens the mouths of opposers. It's still there, this fear of public opinion, of how his past failure undermines his present calling.
Still weighing on him.
Still weighing. But his response is immediate. I had no refuge but in God. Blessed be his name, that I may go to him at all times and find him a present help.
It's so striking, isn't it, that even months later, the Yale incident is still a source of pain. Yet every time it surfaces, it seems to drive him deeper into relying solely on God. What does that tell us about how God uses trials?
I think that's a key insight right there. It tells us that even hardships that bring, public shame or perceived failure, God can actually refine them for greater spiritual good. It wasn't about the trial disappearing, but about how God used it to redirect Brainerd's focus and dependence.
Away from human approval towards divine sufficiency.
Exactly. And we see that play out on July 4th, Lord's Day. He enjoys a happy season in secret prayer. God gives him the exercise of faith, which brings the invisible and eternal world near to my soul, which appeared sweetly to me.
Faith making the eternal real.
Yes. He hopes his weary pilgrimage will be short, that he'll soon be in his heavenly home and Father's house. But he's also resigned to God's will to tarry his time, to do his work, and suffer his pleasure.
Content either way.
Seems so. And he feels thankfulness to God for all my pressing desertions of late, for I am persuaded they have been made a means of making me more humble and much more resigned. He feels pleased to be little, to be nothing, and to lie in the dust.
Finding benefit even in the hard times.
Yes, and he finds life and consolation, pleading for other believers and for God's kingdom, still breathing after holiness and the enjoyment of God.
So a real sense of peace and purpose returning?
It seems so. July 5th to 10th, he enjoys considerable composure and tranquility, with sweetness and fervency of spirit in prayer day after day, a period of stability.
Nice to see.
But then July 11th, the struggle bites again, deserted and exceedingly dejected in the morning. In the afternoon, though, he feels resigned and again sees himself as exceeding vile. It just never fully goes away, that awareness.
The wrestling is persistent.
Very. July 12th to 14th, he expresses inward comfort, resignation, and strength in God. Feels a kind of humble, resigned sweetness, giving himself wholly to the Lord. He hears Mr. Bellamy preach, which makes him long for nearer access to God.
Hearing good preaching stirs him up.
Yeah. Then July 15th to 20th, considerable comfort and fervency in Christian fellowship and spiritual exercises. His desires are particularly focused on weanedness from the world, perfect deadness to it, and to be even crucified to all its allurements.
Wanting detachment from worldly things.
Complete detachment. His soul longs to feel itself more of a pilgrim and stranger here below, that nothing may divert me from pressing through the lonely desert till I arrive at my Father's house. He finds it sweet to give away myself to God, gets a feeling sense of the sweetness of being a pilgrim on earth.
Embracing that pilgrim identity.
Fully. July 21st, he's determined to be wholly devoted to God, spends the whole day in a most diligent exercise of religion, and exceeding comfortably.
A good, solid day.
Seems like it. Then, July 22nd, something interesting happens while traveling. He stops at a house, is very kindly entertained and refreshed, and his reaction...
Let me guess, feeling unworthy.
You got it. He's filled with amazement and shame that God should stir up the hearts of any to show so much kindness to such a dead dog as I. He realizes how exceedingly vile it is not to be wholly devoted to God. He wonders why God even allows creatures to feed him.
Even simple kindness triggers that sense of unworthiness. It never leaves him.
Never. Then July 23rd to 28th, the final stretch before the examination, his diary shows this mix again. Sweet composure and fervency, weanedness from the world, feeling like a pilgrim, wanting to use every inch of time for God.
Final preparation, spiritually speaking.
Exactly. And then July 29th. The culmination of this whole intense period. Brainerd is examined by the association met at Danbury, as to my learning and also my experiences in religion, and received a license from them to preach the gospel of Christ.
He did it. He's licensed.
He's licensed, and afterwards, he feels much devoted to God. He joins in prayer with one of the ministers, his peculiar friend, goes to bed resolving to live devoted to God all my days.
A fitting end to that chapter.
Words right.
Resolve to live devotedly.
A seal on this period of intense formation as he steps into his formal calling, deeply shaped by everything we've just walked through.
Wow. What an incredible deep dive that was into just a few short months of David Brainerd's life. His honesty, his really candid diary entries, they just let us witness a man intensely wrestling with how sinful he felt he was.
Yeah, grappling with that constantly.
While depending completely on God's grace and just passionately going after personal holiness and wanting to see God's kingdom grow.
Right. And his experiences, marked by these really intense lows, but also these incredible spiritual highs, they really underline something vital for anyone trying to walk closely with God, don't they? That the path is almost never a straight line. It's full of ups and downs. But God uses every single moment, the good and the bad, to shape us, to refine us. Brainerd's sense of being nothing before God, it seems almost paradoxical, but it actually fueled his drive to live entirely for God's glory.
That's a great point. And for you, the listener, maybe someone who likes to grasp things quickly, get those aha moments. Brainerd's example shows that, well, maybe genuine devotion often comes packaged with this really deep self-awareness, maybe even awareness of failure.
Yeah, and an absolute reliance on divine favor, not on your own strength or smarts.
Exactly. His constant return to prayer, his fervent prayers for others. It really highlights where real spiritual strength comes from, doesn't it? Not from within, but from God.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, Brainerd's account really gives you a clear view into how God gets people ready for his work. It happens even through things that look like setbacks, like the Yale expulsion, or through all those internal conflicts he faced.
So his journey to getting licensed wasn't just about hitting the books.
Not at all. It was about a profound shaping of his entire being, his character, his heart. God was preparing the man, not just the preacher.
That leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? What does all this mean for us today? Consider Brainerd's resolution on the day he got his license. Resolving to live devoted to God all my days.
A simple but total resolve.
Right. So the question for you is, what parts of your own walk with God might be deepened if you adopted that kind of singular focus on God's design for you, even when you're feeling weak or facing pressures from the world around you?
Yeah, what would that look like? It's definitely something to chew on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into David Brainerd's diary.
We hope that hearing about his raw honesty might spark some reflection for you on your own spiritual growth and your own dependence on God's grace.